Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for January 2022. We have a whole bunch of things to look at today, so let's just jump right into it. The first thing we're going to look at today is something really fun. It's actually a port of Half-Life, the classic game. This port was added by Jesse, and it actually supports the original game, but also expansions like Opposing Force. And as you can see, I'm hitting about 70 FPS here in software rendering mode. So it performs really well just on the CPU, although it doesn't look super great, of course, because there's no fancy graphics. This is actually how I first played this game back in the 90s. So it actually looks exactly how I remember it, which is just really sweet. So thank you very much, Jesse, for adding this awesome port, and be sure to check that out if you're interested. So let's look at some other stuff. In the terminal this month, we have a bunch of new settings. For example, people have been adding color themes, so not just the standard default colors anymore, but if you like Monokai, or maybe you like solarized, this type of stuff, then there's all kinds of options here that you can choose now. Let's try this one called Zenburn. Try that out maybe. And a bunch of people added themes. I think Joel and Klinus and Brandon have all been adding various themes here. So thank you everybody for working on that. And and also the scroll bar of terminal can now be toggled on and off thanks to some changes by Brian. So I guess Brian prefers to use his terminal with no scroll bar, and now we have this option. I guess it looks kind of nice actually. Let's leave it off. Okay. Something I worked on this month is command palettes. So I did a video where I introduced this new feature that pops up if you press Ctrl-Shift-A. So this pops up this command palette, which allows you to search through the application actions where you currently are. So I'm in terminal, so I see all of the various menu options and items here. I can open the settings like that. And this works in every application. So if I'm in File Manager and I want to create a desktop shortcut or maybe a new folder, new directory, I can open that right from here. Barafu, let's say. Look, it created it. So that's pretty cool. And this thing is automatic, so it just picks up all the actions in the application depending on where you activate it. And I did the initial implementation, and then Jakob Niklas has done a bunch of work on it as well, adding stuff like this second column here, which shows which menu the action is from, which is a really sweet way to learn sort of where actions come from. So if you find something this way, you can also learn which menu you can find it in. And Jakob Niklas also added these checkboxes here for toggleable actions. And in fact, there should also be radio buttons for radio actions. So I guess something like these previews here, if we look for them in the thing here, yeah, we can see that they indeed have radio buttons. So really, really cool stuff. And I'm looking forward to see what else we can do with this thing. But more keyboard access to the system just feels really good. And other desktop stuff, we have some new themes this month. I think Cupertino is sort of an experimental theme added by Philip. And in support of this theme, Philip also implemented border radius for Windows and title bar alignment. So there's been a bunch of work on the theme engine to support themes that look a bit like this. And then Brandon also added some themes like, I think, was it Olive? Is that the one I'm thinking of? Definitely Pumpkin and Scarlet. And yeah, so some new themes coming in. Of course, I still prefer the classic default theme, so I'm just going to revert back to that. But for those of you who enjoy other color themes, now there are some more options. Brandon has also been doing actually all kinds of stuff. So let me show you some other Brandon things. He worked on some new fonts. So here are, let's see, there's a new, if we turn off here, there's a new fixed width font called Source, and it looks like this. So pretty similar to the old one, but has like its own distinct appearance. So definitely super nice to have more alternative fixed width fonts for terminals and source code. And I think he also added another one called Cathode. Yeah, this one is more like these old IBM PC fonts that you would see in like on a text console. So look at that. Oh, wait, we had a little rendering glitch there, it looked like. But yeah, this one is also a new Brandon font. So thank you very much, Brandon, for working on this. I love seeing more options like this added. And let's see. So since we're on the topic of fonts, there's a new application in utilities here called Character Map. And this was added by Sam. And it's just a way to browse different characters. And you can, I think you can search for them here. Like, wait, no, this is not how you search. I thought it was that. I guess this is just where you type. Okay, well, that shows what I know. You double click them and they get pasted down there. That's what it was for. Well, it would be nice to have something that allows me to search for a character by name. Oh, look, maybe we actually have that. Can I search for Interrobang? I can. Oh my goodness. Okay. I gotta try using these apps more. I actually didn't play with this one other than just opening it and taking a look. So that's really awesome that it allows me to search. Thank you very much, Sam, for adding this super sweet character map app. It reminds me of the char map application in Windows 95, which was really sweet. All right, let's see something else. How about another new application? So I know Tim has been working on time zones a bunch this month. And in support of that, he added a new clock settings app where you can change the system time zone. So right now, mine is set to UTC, which is the default. And that isn't actually accurate for my local time. So what if I were to just switch this to Europe Stockholm? And then we will okay that. And look at that. Now I actually see the local time. That's super kick-ass. And there's been a lot of work by Tim to support time zones. This GUI app here is just sort of the very top of that iceberg. So super awesome work by Tim. And let's see, I believe that LS should also pick up stuff like this so that if I create a file here, it actually shows the local time date and not the UTC date. So these changes are system-wide, which is really, really cool. And special shout out to Tim, actually, because he just hit 1,000 commits in the project today. And that is really awesome. I'm really happy to have Tim with us doing all this great work. All right, something else that was cool this month is in the display settings, where Tom has worked on talking to monitors so we can learn more about the display device that we're on. So previously we would just show something here like, oh, this is frame buffer 0. Whereas now we actually have a way to learn more about the screen. And we can see here that this is a QEMU monitor, a 13-inch, whatever. So we actually parse the EDID data in order to show something here. Very, very cool. Something else that's pretty neat is, let's see, I think in help, there was something I wanted to show. So A bunch of people have improved our documentation this month by adding new pages about various apps and improving existing pages. That's really, really cool. And I think even stuff like games now have their own documentation pages where you can read about like how does Flappy Bug work? And it says here like, well, Flappy Bug is a SerenityOS themed version of the Flappy Bird classic. So you can actually learn these kind of things here. And if I'm not mistaken, that was David who wrote this man page, I think. Let's see. And for some things, not all apparently, but some things, we now have open links here, which allow you to open an application directly from the help. So if you want to open Image Viewer, you can click here and it just pops up the application that you're reading about. So that's a nice little integration feature added by Linus. So thank you very much, Linus, for that. Okay, let's look at something else. Let's see. I know that the PDF viewer has some new stuff. So if we open a PDF here, Marcus was adding some things like, for example, you can now pan around PDFs by pressing down the middle mouse button or the scroll wheel and then just mousing around. Very, very nice. And Marcus also added these rotation actions. So if you want to rotate a page left and right, you can do that. So big thanks to Marcus for improving PDF viewer. And then let's look at Pixel Paint. So maybe we can open a cool picture like this one of Buggy here. Wait a minute. We don't allow opening images in Pixel Paint? This we need to fix, but maybe not right now. So I guess we can just open Pixel Paint separately and then drag it in there. Sure. All right. So a bunch of new things in Pixel Paint. For example, we have a whole bunch of new icons for various menu items like swap colors and clear selection, and all kinds of items or all kinds of actions now have icons thanks to Brandon. Same Brandon who did all these new fonts and themes and stuff. Brandon has been really been killing it on the GUI polish front this month, which is super appreciated. I just love seeing these kind of things come in, like all these subtle refinements that together really raise the feeling of quality in the system. Super awesome. Tobias added a new filter gallery. So in the filter gallery, you can browse the available sort of photo filters or color filters. So here's one that Tobias added, the bloom filter. So let's apply that and look at that. Look at that juicy bloom effect. And let's try another filter. I think we have a sepia tone filter, which was added by Xavier, I think. Wow, bloom and sepia, looking good. Anyway, so that's pretty cool stuff. And there was a bunch of work that is less visible, of course, as usual, to talk about. Me personally, I have worked a whole bunch on kernel stuff this month. Really unglamorous work of just tracking down race conditions, deadlocks, and memory leaks, and just entire days going into tasks like that. But the result of all that work is that the system is a lot more stable now, and you can see it on our continuous integration system, which just has way fewer failures, and it continues to improve. And actually something that I talked about many times last year is how I wanted to sort of switch my own focus this year towards stability and performance. And that's something I've started doing, and it's going really well so far. And of course, also in the kernel, we continue our work on out of memory conditions or low memory conditions. So Edan has been doing a ton of great work improving the stability of the kernel in the face of low memory conditions. And actually what he does, he told me, is that he sort of instruments the kernel allocator to just fail sometimes. And then we see just how well the kernel can respond to an allocation failure. And that is just really exciting work, I think. Even though it's kind of invisible, just this feeling of the system becoming more and more stable is a really, really good feeling. And actually, I'm also recently working on multi-core support again, which is something that maybe has been a little bit neglected. So I'm looking forward to seeing the stability of that increase as well in the coming year. But anyway, the final thing about the kernel that I wanted to mention is that we now have an initial driver for Nvme. So basically for modern hard drives, I guess, and stuff like that. And this was added by Pankaj. So really, really exciting to see that going into the kernel. And now we are going to hear from Jelle, who's going to talk about Libgl and 3D graphics in the system.
Thank you, Andreas. So I'd like to talk about the changes in Libgl and libsoft-GPU for the month of January. So the first thing, Half-Life. It's amazing. It's an amazing port by Jesse. And Luke took this work and made sure that we could also run Half-Life on top of Libgl. Whereas previously it was only running using the software renderer. So let me show you. Let's boot up the intro. So what you see now is two things. You can see Half-Life being rendered by Libgl, which is amazing. Apparently we were not that far off of supporting the things that we needed for Half-Life to be able to render it in this way. And this is really cool because Half-Life in OpenGL mode has some things like colored lighting that really helps set the ambience. It's an amazing game, and seeing this run inside of Serenity on top of our emulated Libgl, it's great. And the second thing that you can see is on the top left here, we have this debug overlay. This is something that Stefan made, and it shows us statistics like the frames per second, the number of triangles being drawn, SIMD usage, the number of pixels. When debugging issues, this is immensely useful. It helps us find out where the issue is, if we're blocking parts of the screen too early, if we're not using the stencil buffer, if there's too much overdraw. Yeah, immensely useful. So the second thing I'd like to show you is TuxRacer. So late last year we ended up with TuxRacer being playable, but visually it wasn't all there. So the things that were missing mainly were the textures on the ground and lighting. Well, in January we made sure that both of these things are now working. I worked on texture coordinate generation, which was the thing that was missing in order for the textures on the ground to be rendered. And Jesse did some work on lighting, and as you can see on Tux himself, he has some nice ambient and juicy specular lighting. You can really see his ass being lighted up here. It's beautiful. Yeah, I love it. And basically we are, well, within range of rendering TuxRacer as it should on hardware. So this is really cool. There are some coloring issues, I think, and minor details here and there. But this is nearly finished. This is awesome. The next thing I'd like to show you is Quake. Quake has been demoed before, but what has happened in the last month is that there has been a lot of performance work. Especially Stefan has been working on getting SIMD instructions into our fragment pipeline, for example. What does this mean? Well, whenever you see a game like this on screen, we render everything with triangles, and those triangles are rendered by pixels. And each and every pixel you see here needs to go through a certain amount of steps. Well, previously, before we had the SIMD instructions, we would calculate the fragment colors and depth values and all the testing that we do for each pixel per pixel. But with SIMD instructions, we are now able to calculate all those values with 4 pixels at a time. Well, you can imagine this really helps if your hardware supports it. This immensely improves the performance. Additionally, Stefan has been working on subpixel precision for rendering. So every triangle that we render on screen has its vertices snapped to a certain integer grid position on your screen. When you have 2 triangles that are close together, in between those triangles you could get some white pixels, because when you work with integers, you could have some discrepancies here and there that would leave a gap open between the 2 triangles. With subpixel precision, that problem is effectively gone. We still have some rendering artifacts, but as you can see, the white pixels that were present in the previous demo, they are gone. And additionally, when you look at textures and you move really slowly, for example, you have a panning camera, no longer do you see things jump or jitter. It's all really smooth now. So that's great work by Stefan as well. And the last thing that he did for Quake was support for multi-texturing. Multi-texturing is basically the idea that when you render a triangle, for each point in the triangle, we need to determine which pixel to get from the textures. And sometimes you want to have multiple textures on the triangle. For example, in Quake, you would have the diffuse color coming from the pixel from the texture. In this case, we're looking at a certain stone. But then overlaid on top of that is the lighting map. And the lighting map is Quake's way of calculating lights and shadows in the game. So previously we did not have multi-texturing support, and what Quake basically did was render each triangle twice. Once with the base texture and then again with the light map. Now we have support for multi-texturing, which means we just render the one triangle, and for each pixel we loop over all the textures that were activated by the game, and we combine them using certain functions and operators into the final color that you see on screen. And you can imagine this is more efficient than rendering multiple triangles, because we just need to do the triangle calculations once and we then loop over multiple textures per pixel. Then Lenny came in, and what Lenny did, and is still working on by the way, is improved clipping performance. So clipping performance is whenever you have a triangle on screen, we need to limit what you see, because a triangle, for example, we have these steps here, can go off screen. So if I turn my view like this, you can see that the triangles that are rendered here for this first step, they go outside of my viewport. Well, we need to take this into account when rendering. So we have clipping code, and this clipping code effectively introduces new triangles to make sure that whatever was a triangle that went outside of the screen is now multiple triangles that limit themselves to the inside of the viewport. Well, Lenny has done amazing work on improving the performance on this and making sure that the code is simpler and uses more templates. And he has some work upcoming that will really help with performance in this case as well. And the final thing is something that I did, and that's viewport support. So every OpenGL application has the option of editing the location of where things are rendered. And in Quake, for example, you can see this here. I can reduce the screen size. And basically what Quake did here is define a new viewport that's smaller than the window it's being rendered in. And inside of that window is all the magic happening, basically. So really cool stuff. The final thing I'd like to demo is some work that I did on ScumVM, more specifically for Grim Fandango. What Grim Fandango uses for shadows is the Stencil Buffer. And the Stencil Buffer in OpenGL is basically a grid of numbers that you can manipulate. You can increase those numbers, you can reset those numbers, and you can use these numbers to perform certain tests to discard pixels, for example. So what you see here is Manny is walking through his office, and you can see a shadow on the ground. So what the game is doing here, it is rendering some triangles on the ground. They are invisible, but they are writing to the Stencil Buffer. And basically every pixel where this triangle was drawn into the Stencil Buffer is a location where the shadows of Manny can be drawn. So it might be hard to see, but as soon as Manny walks over here, he no longer draws any shadow on the ground. While if he's walking inside the part that has been masked out by the Stencil Buffer, you can clearly see his shadow. And the final thing that we've done for Grim Fandango is implement the rasterization position. So as you can see here, the background is 2D and many itself is 3D. But some things are in front of many. So the depth buffer needs to be updated by the game in order to explain that some things need to be drawn in front of many and some things need to be drawn behind many. And in this case, what it does is it basically has a 2D bitmap with a depth buffer, and it draws that directly to the screen. And in order to understand where the game wants to draw this bitmap on the screen, we need to have rasterization positions. And as you can see, that is working terrifically as well. I hope you liked this demo and some of the changes that we've made to Libgl and Libsoft GPU in the last month. If you'd like to chat with us on this and help us out with some of the work that we're still doing on these components, come visit us in the OpenGL channel on Discord. Back to you, Andreas.
Well, thank you, Jelle. The next thing we're going to look at is Hack Studio, which we haven't talked about for a while. And there's some really exciting new stuff going on here that Itamar has been working on. So let me actually open up Serenity itself in Hack Studio. So you can do that by just specifying the directory that you want to open, and that will load in the entire Serenity project, which actually takes a while and maybe something we can improve, but here it is. And something that's really awesome and totally new is that now, if I open something like the shell, for example, then I can actually build Serenity components directly in Hack Studio because it knows how to talk to CMake, and it just detects that this is a Serenity component, basically. As you can see here, we are just building the shell inside Serenity, and I can even edit while it's building. If I say that I actually wanted to add a cool banner to the shell, like hello and welcome to the shell. It would be cool to have something like that, right? So let's actually, let's build with that. And then we can run from right here. And you see, we run down here in the console, prints the cool banner, and now we have a shell. So this is super duper cool, I think, because it means that Hack Studio is basically usable for editing and building and testing Serenity components. Now, it still struggles a bit with GUI components. So the shell is an example of something that works really well here, but work continues, and super, super awesome stuff already by Itamar, who got all this stuff working. And actually check out these little pluses here indicating that these are not yet committed to Git. So that's that good old Git integration just working. I'm just noticing here and being a little impressed by how neat that is. Anyway, really, really excited about this stuff, and look forward to seeing more about it. Now we are going to hear from Linus, who's going to talk about JavaScript and browser stuff.
All right, so let's look at all the browser and libweb changes from this month. So first of all, Luke did a bit of work on the DOM support. So we now have a couple of more insertion methods. So for example, you can insert elements before a certain DOM node or after a certain DOM node and get like the parent and stuff like that. So that's quite useful. Andreas did a ton of work on layout improvements, for example, inline and block formatting context, which is clearly visible in the result of the asset2 test, for example, which now looks pretty close to perfect. And also the, this is asset1, and the asset2 test, which oddly started smiling, which is something new. So previously it was sort of a frowning face. So lots of improvement there, but also still a long way to go. And then also Luke worked on URL search params a bit more. So we now support this syntax where you pass an array of basically two values, one the key, one the value, and then, as you can see, that is now correctly interpreted as foo equals bar. So this interface is basically now fully working, which is really cool. And then Nico did some work on attribute hidden. So for example, let's pull the HTML preview up here. So for example, if you just put a random title element in the body, it's not going to show up because title is spec to have attribute hidden by default, or display hidden, and so that's not possible. Also, Synac worked on canvas rendering context, especially the measure text function, so you can now get the size of a certain text before rendering it, which is quite useful and can be used for positioning it, for example. Sam, as usual, worked on a ton of CSS stuff, bunch of refactoring, better handling for different value types, font size in percentages, for example, media query improvements, various things. And then lastly, Luke also worked on supporting union types in IDL, so where you can have multiple types as input or output parameters. Okay, so let's look at all the JavaScript changes from this month. In terms of test 262, as usual, we're up by a whole more than 2% this month. So from 77.5% to 79.8%, and which you can see on this graph here. So it's still going up, which is great. And also Ali made this very useful page to view the results of individual directories or even individual files, which has been very helpful for identifying broken tests. So thank you very much, Ali, for implementing this. Let's look at some of the changes. So one of the very exciting ones is David implemented full support for modules in Libg.js. So we already had some basic support. He did the parsing bits earlier, basic import and export statement parsing. But now we have full module importing, module resolution. So let's have a look at this file, for example. I have import module.js, which imports a variable message from foo.mjs, and then console.logs that message. And the module foo.mjs simply exports a constant message variable, which is a string. And so the JS REPL has gained a new flag, which is called -m for module. And so if you enable that, it will pass as a module, which will enable support for imports and exports. And so if we run the import module file, you can see it logs, well, hello friends, which it imported from a different file, which is super cool. And then he also implemented dynamic import, which is basically import like this as a function, which then returns a promise on completion, as it might fetch over the network, for example. And then he also implemented the import assertions stage 3 proposal, which looks like this. You basically have this assert after the import statement, and then type JSON. There could be other types as well. For now, it's just JSON, which is a separate stage 3 proposal that he implemented. And so here we just say this is basically like a default import from this JSON file, and then log the foo property. And so if we look at the foo.json file, it's just regular JSON, just like an object type. Foo is a string test. And so if we run that again with the -m flag, import JSON, it's going to print out test, which is also imported from the disk. So really great work, David. I made a video reviewing that PR, so if you're interested, it's on my channel. Next up is Tim, who went full Madman mode this month and implemented countless things. He also hit 1,000 commits in the Serenity project, which is really cool. So congrats on that. Yeah, various Intel things. Let's have a look at a few. So for example, the also stage 3 proposal. You see lots of new proposals this month. Intel.supported values of. Intel. And then you pass it like some sort of property, for example, unit. And it's going to return all the units that are supported in our implementation, which is useful if you want to check whether a certain unit is supported and you can do something with it, instead of trying and then figuring out if it failed. And this also works for things like currency, which we have quite a few, and also things like time zone, which we possibly have even more of. So this is great. He also worked on various other Intel things. So we have now big-int support in number format. Number format already existed for regular numbers, but now we can have huge numbers formatted with the various options. Also, he implemented a relative time format, which is for things like 5 minutes ago or in 10 months. And also some partial support for Intel.collator and plural rules. But the core functionality of that is still missing. He also did some changes to date constructor and date.utc just for spec compliance. And then time zone DSD handling. So, for example, we can make a temporal time zone, Europe, London. And then we ask for a time zone offset string at a certain point in time. And in this case, going to return an offset of 0 because of no daylight saving time. But if we ask for the same time zone, an offset for 2 months earlier, we get +1 because at that time, the Europe-London time zone was still in daylight saving time. So previously, we would just ignore that. So this is great. This is all sourced from the Unicode CLDR, the Common Data Locale Repository. And he has been continuing to build out libunicode, which is still growing. So another thing he did was implement just today big-int parsing of hexadecimal big-ints, for example. So you can obviously say big-int 1, 2, 3, which is just going to return 1, 2, 3. But you can also say 0xFF, which now works as expected. Previously, we would just fail that as not recognized. Okay, and then Eden did Intel.segmenter, which is a relatively new API. So segmenter, which you pass a locale. Like this. And then you can just say s.segment and then pass it a string. And we can make an array from that. And then it's going to segment that string into certain like categories, which is especially useful for languages that don't use like a space to separate words, as English might do. For example, Asian languages wouldn't have that, and so you can have like locale-aware segmenting into words or sentences and stuff like that. So this is really nice. Again, Intel growing very much this month. We have like a tracking issue on the GitHub tracker where it's nearing 100%. So great work from both Tim and Eden on this. What else is new? Luke implemented also a new stage 3 proposal, which is array.groupby. So it's really simple. Array just gains a new method called groupby. I think there's also groupby map. And that you pass a function, which is going to receive each value and the index We're just interested in the value. And then, for example, you can say if x is a even number, return, and then now you return like a key, which is going to end up in the object. So here we want to say even, and otherwise we want to say odd. And that's going to create an object, and then it's going to go through each value and test it on this condition, and then put it in the returned key for that condition. So for the odd number, we returned odd, so it's put 1 and 3 in the odd array, and for 2 it returned even, so it's put in the even array, which is quite useful. It's not hard to implement manually, but it's quite convenient to not like have to group to all the numbers and then make an object and create keys and stuff like that. So that's another proposal. Also updates on shadow realm. So they made a slight change where a function would inherit the target's name and length. So for example, if you do function foo, and then you have foo.name, which is foo, and some existing functionality is, for example, bind. So foo.bind to whatever value, and then the name of that. That didn't work. Not sure why that's not working now. Either way, so they just changed it so that the same applies in Shadow Realm, basically. Similar for temporal, we have got a couple of spec changes all implemented. Also discovered a couple of more bugs which have been reported and are, I think, due for fixing in March in the next TC39 meeting. So looking forward to that. Nico did some work for big-ints, just fixing some bitwise operation functionality that was not working properly. Also a result of the test262 results viewer, I believe. And then we now have a spec-compliant function.toString. So previously, if you would still have this foo function, if you say foo.toString, it's supposed to like capture the whole source text, including line breaks and comments and stuff like that. Previously, we wouldn't do that and just put like question mark in there, which obviously doesn't work. So now that's fully implemented. The same works for classes. So if I make like a class like this and say bar.toString, it's also going to return the string of that class. Again, just for spec compliance. GitHub user for love of cats did a small fix in JSON parsing to allow negative zeros. So previously we would return a just positive zero for that. And then a lot of internal refactoring. So for example, we now have a templated construct call where you can say construct and then some function, and then you would pass like all the arguments, and it would automatically in the background create a arguments list object for that. Previously you had to construct it manually, which was done by Tim. We did a lot of work on completions again, which you might have heard about before. So the full AST is now using completions, which is an internal thing that the spec defines. It's just a lot easier to follow if you can compare it with the spec. So the AST uses that. The same applies to the unwind mechanism for try, accept, and break. We had a custom one that was very easy to get wrong, hard to understand. So that is now updated. And the same for iterator records. They previously abused objects, and so we've also gone and removed the need to allocate an object for iterators. So internally they use an iterator record. And then a finally mention for Andreas, who did some memory and performance improvements, especially targeted at the x86-64 build, which is still quite a bit slower, but he's done a lot of work on that to identify that slowness and memory usage. So a really busy month for libjs, really great work by everyone. And that's it from me.
All right, I think that's everything we had to show you today. So thank you all so much for checking in and staying up to date with the project. If you want to come chat, please join the Discord server. There's a link to it in the video description. And I also have a weekly live stream here on YouTube. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time. It's called the SerenityOS Office Hours, and you can come there and we'll just chat about SerenityOS and related topics. Finally, if you would like to sponsor development of SerenityOS, you can find donation options for myself and Linus and Sam in the video description below. And I'm personally working on this full-time since May of last year, thanks to the awesome support of many of you watching right now. So thank you all so much for helping me do this. The last thing I want to say is big thanks to my co-hosts, Jelle and Linus. I really, really appreciate having you guys on here to help show what's new. So thank you for doing that. All right, that's it for today. So see you all next time.